Welcome everybody to the roughness portion of the ground dirt tutorial. I know it's been a while. I was having some issues with my computer, especially my RAM. I had to get some new ones and I ordered them on Amazon. Then they got delayed, so I ended up going to Best Buy. It was a whole thing, but we're back. So let's finish up this ground dirt with the roughness. So here, we're just going to worry about all the different variants that we have for our roughness: wet, dry, the wet shorelines of our puddles here, and all that good stuff. So let's hop right into it. All right, this one should be fairly short. It's pretty straightforward. We just have to worry about the switches. So I'm going to disable these, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so we are working with the preset of dry with moss with water, because we have different roughnesses for different presets. So to get started, we are going to start with this ambient occlusion HBAO that's coming from this water level lifeguard. So after that, we're just going to follow that up into an ambient occlusion. And then after that, we're going to do a non-uniform blur grayscale to blur it a little bit. Then after that, it's going to go into a gradient map. Just going to click on these, so look at the position and then the values. Then that is going to feed into a blend, set the copy and 0.1. And then what's going to go into the foreground is this auto leveled purling noise that we used in the beginning of the color portion of the tutorial. Then after this, and we'll worry about this for if it's wet, so we'll come back to that in a second. So after this blend, we're going to go into another blend, set the copy in 1 with a grayscale uniform color here of 0.65. And then we need an invert grayscale, and what's going to fit into it is the final shape, the auto levels from the final shape, just after the sharpen. So before the water level lifeguard, split, and use that to go on top here into an invert grayscale, into a histogram scan, into the opacity. Because here I'm trying to find the lower levels in our height. So yeah, let's get to wet, and then we'll come back and do the wet portion of it. So then after this blend here, we continue on into this guy. And then we just do another layer here. We have this uniform color going into the foreground, and then for the opacity, we're pulling from this blur grayscale here. So you can follow where it's at. And then that is going to go into false because we're doing a wet switch. And then for true, we're just going to follow this back. So from this non-uniform blur grayscale here, or actually from the ambient occlusion, we're going to pull out and just have this guy here waiting, and we'll come back to that. And then from the blur grayscale, we're going to do another gradient map. And then that is going to feed into this blend here, into the background. That same histogram scan that we used is going to go into the opacity. And then we're going to use this darker grayscale of 0.075 to go into the foreground. And let me just switch back the, or let me turn wet on. So we have two separate gradient maps. One's for dry, obviously because it's brighter, so it's going to be rougher. And then this one's darker, so it's going to be more glossy, or the opposite of roughness. Okay, so now that we have this guy here that we created, that's going to feed into an invert and then histogram scan. And we're trying to isolate um, the deeper spots here. And then we're going to feed that back over here with a copy. And we're going to be using that same uniform, the dark one from before. And then that's going to feed into the true portion, or the true input of the switch. So now let me turn this back off. So we're going to continue with the dry version. We're already a third of the way there. So from that wet switch, continue on over here, and that's going to go into this blend. Now here I'm taking the high points, so you can see that it's only making a change in some areas, or I guess the mossy areas. So we have a uniform grayscale here of white for the foreground, and then for the opacity we're pulling from this blend, which is coming from the moss, the first moss color. Yeah. So from here, from this blend, that's going to go down here into this levels, and that's going to go into the opacity. And then from here, we're going to have a wet switch again. And then this is going to go into false, and then we're going to split from before this change, and then that's going to go into true. Then after that, after the switch, we have this guy. All right, just checking that. Okay, so after the switch, we have a blend here at the copy using that white again. And then for the opacity, we're going to use a levels that's going to be coming from this guy here into this levels. You can see a subtle change there. Then from that into another blend, set to copy as well using the same white as before. Then here we're going to be pulling from this auto levels here. Pull from that into a histogram scan to tighten it up. Into another blend, we're pulling from this guy that's coming from over here. Multiplying that so it's not so uniform to break it up a little bit. Then we have a levels going into the opacity. Then from here we move on to this guy. Same thing, use the white, copy, and then we need to use this levels here. Actually, I think this levels here is just the default one, just there to kind of hold it in place. And it's going to pull from the continuation of all these nodes here. And you can see what it's doing here. It's kind of highlighting or roughening the tips of the moss. To find a better light source or light angle. Now we're going to use another switch, but this one is set to moss. So all these things that we did are for if moss is turned on. So that's going to go into the true. And then we need this to go into the false, which is skipping all of this moss stuff here. So because it's if the moss switch is turned off, then obviously we don't want any of these things that we just did. So it's going to pull from before any of the moss stuff. So that's just going to go up. And it's just going to continue on here into the false. Then we move on to the footprint roughness stuff. So actually I need to turn on footprints so we can see it. So I'm going to turn on footprints. There you go. So this is the first thing. Another white here. Could just pull from here, but since it's its own area for foot stuff. I wanted to make a new one. Oh, well, and the value's different. So we're using a 0.9 of white there for the grayscale, a copy blend, and then we are pulling from after the footprint switch from the height. That's going to feed into the levels here, and then that's going to go into the opacity. And then we have a footprint switch. So after what we just did, we'll go into true, and obviously if there's no footprint, then we don't want that. So before the footprint blend, that splits up here and goes into the false. Should probably put it down here, probably easier to read. All right. And then we have another one here. And I think this is for, yeah, this is for if it's wet. So let's turn wet back on. Yeah, you can see the difference there. So this is for wet only. So from this levels here, we're going to pull and it's going to split into two. The first one's going to be an ambient occlusion, HBAO, into an invert, because it gives us this fall off because of the ambient occlusion. Then here we take a histogram scan into a blur, and then we multiply those two, and that goes into the opacity. And then we take a uniform grayscale here of 0.1 into the foreground. And don't worry about how it looks here because it's going to be covered in water soon. Okay, so that's going to feed into the footprint switch. And then that's going to go for true. And then everything, before this blend, it's going to split again and it's going to go into false. And then we need another switch here for wet. And then again from here, that's going to go into false. And then whatever came from this footprint switch is going to go into true. Because this is all for true or wet footprints. All right. But we're on the last third here. Now this is for false, so let's turn, oh, this is for the rocks, so let's turn off our wet. Okay, so from the continuation of what we just did, that's going to go into the background, obviously. We have a white here for the foreground, and then for the opacity, we have a levels that's coming from this invert grayscale after an HBAO, which is coming from down here, from the height. Into those levels, just round that down. So you can see here that we're kind of adding like a little bit of a, this is where like, you know, dirt on the dirt would start to accumulate around the rocks. It would probably be a little rougher. So if we find some rocks here, you can see that it's adding some like roughening around our rocks, which is what we want there. Then, okay, let's get a little messy here. Okay, so let's just follow this blend. So we're just going to follow this blend, and that's just going to go directly into this switch, into the false, because that's the end of roughness for dry. And now for wet, let's switch over. We're going to split before we did that dry change here, up here. And then we're going to split down into this blend here. And we're doing a grayscale of 0.5. That's going to go into the foreground. And then we're going to use the histogram scan, which is our mask for our rocks. That's going to go down there into a copy. So now our rocks have an overall roughness to them. And then following that is going to go into this blend. and then whatever came before this blend is going to continue on, and that's going to go into the foreground, and then we just need an opacity. Oops. So we're going to take the auto levels from this invert grayscale that we just used before, just recently, to an auto levels, and then into a levels here. And then we're going to get some roughening on the edges. And that's going to go into the switch grayscale for the true. All right, and then for the last little bit here, now this is where we add all our water stuff, or puddles stuff. So for the first one, this is where it starts to kind of, since it's the last step, it's going to cover all the weird stuff, because this is like assuming that there's no water. So we have a blend with black as water is reflective, foreground, and then opacity, we're pulling from our water level mask. So actually we can just do a dot here, and then pull our water level mask. Good thing we only have two, just to kind of keep it a little cleaner. Then we have this layer here. I think, yeah, this is for the shorelines. So we're gonna pull from this guy, which is right above our water level mask. Could have made that a portal too, probably. And then we have a levels here, tuning the fall off for the wetness around the puddle line, or puddle shoreline. And then I have another, could probably just reuse these two. But I guess if you want to have your puddle shoreline be a different roughness value than your water, then you would have you would need two separate ones. So you can see the difference here. So then that level is going to go to the opacity. This one's going to go into the foreground. And then this blend is going to continue on into the background. Now skipping this, actually before we do that, let's continue this blend. So then that's just going to go into the true portion of this switched grayscale here. Okay. So then we're going to go back over here, and it's going to split up top into this blend, and then this one is for dry. So let's turn wet back off, and then this is the shoreline for dry. Probably tweak it a little bit. I don't want that much fall off. So we're going to pull from the same shoreline mask here. Opacity, and then this is going to go into the foreground. This is going to go into the middle, and then you can use this guy here to determine how wet you want that shoreline to look. And then that's going to go into the false for the wet switch. I think that's it. Yeah, so pretty simple. Let me switch some stuff here. Okay. Just an update. I was actually, before my computer decided to die on me, I was working on some high-end tutorials that I've purchased. I'm going to be I would like to do a review on it. Because I learned a lot from it that I'm hoping I can bring into the future tutorials. So I might be away for a bit because I have some other IRL stuff that's come up. But I am still working on material for the channel. But they might be a little slower. I might throw in some like quick ones in there. But I'm trying to use different nodes every time, so that we're not just recycling what we know. I want there to be something new in every tutorial, not just for you guys, but for myself as well. So that might be a little slower, but I also want to do some of that Unreal stuff I mentioned with this material. So I'm also working on that. So there's a lot of stuff cooking, but it might just be a little bit in between, at least for a little bit, on tutorials. So I hope you guys don't cry yourselves to sleep. But I mean, that's it for this one, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.